Pharmacy Times. Everything pharmacy, every day.
Yeah, of course. So the EPCOR FL1 trial was a global phase 3 open label randomized trial that compared epcoritamab plus rituximab and lenalidomide. We often refer to rituximab and lenalidomide as R squared. So that combination plus EPCOR against R squared alone in patients with relapsed or refractory follicular lymphoma. So these patients had to be anywhere from grade 1 to 3A after at least one prior systemic therapy, including an anti-CD20 plus chemotherapy. They were randomized 1-to-1, so they either received EPCOR plus R squared or just R squared alone. And now the EPCOR was given in its standard subcutaneous step-up dosing up to 48 milligrams in cycle 1, and then weekly in cycles 2 and 3, and every 4 weeks beyond that for up to 12 cycles. For primary endpoints, overall response rate was the primary endpoint and progression-free survival. The secondary endpoints were what you kind of anticipate: complete response rate, duration of response, overall survival, all endpoints that we commonly see in this disease state. In terms of results, and what was remarkable about these results was that the combination of the three drugs found that the overall response rate was significantly higher in those patients receiving epcoritamab plus R squared compared to R squared alone. And so percentage-wise, 95% compared to 79%. So R squared has really good response on its own, but epcoritamab with R squared has even better. What they did also note was that the risk of progression or death was reduced by 79% with the addition of epcoritamab, and the estimated progression-free survival rate favored EPCOR R squared. So in terms of complete response and durability, something we often look at as well, substantially higher for EPCOR R squared, and the duration of response and complete response was favoring the EPCOR arm. The median duration of response was not reached, so that is also good news. And then naturally, after you look at efficacy, you're then comparing safety and tolerability. And, EPCOR R squared, not surprisingly, we did see some incidents of cytokine release syndrome, which is often what you see with epcoritamab, often seen early with initial dosing, mostly grade 1 or 2, managed with our standard management that we have incorporated, and they didn't really find any new safety signals beyond what we had already seen. So kind of putting that all together, we know that high and durable response rate in this patient population that have been previously treated, mostly low-grade CRS, very manageable with standard mitigation strategies. So nice to see kind of more of a chemo-free immunotherapy-based regimen earlier in patients with relapsed refractory follicular lymphoma. Yeah, so epcoritamab is unique. It's considered chemotherapy-free. So it's a CD3, CD20 bispecific T-cell engager that simultaneously binds CD20 on malignant B cells and then CD3 on T cells. So essentially what it's doing is redirecting a patient's own T cells to directly kill the lymphoma cells. Now, this differs fundamentally from our traditional follicular lymphoma therapies because it relies on passive immune mechanisms or cytotoxic chemo. So compared with lenalidomide alone, epcoritamab provides more of a direct targeted formation that leads to more potent and antigen-specific cytotoxicity without the need for maybe a CAR T cell therapy that has more of that ex vivo cell manipulation. So definitely a unique mechanism of action and clearly showing great responses in this patient population. Yeah, so this was recently approved in November 2025 by the FDA in combination with rituximab and lenalidomide for adult patients with relapsed refractory after at least one prior systemic therapy. Sometimes with clinical trials, the FDA may not follow the inclusion criteria verbatim, but in this case it did. And so in terms of the landscape implications that I'm seeing here is that obviously this is the first bispecific antibody combination regimen in randomized phase 3 that demonstrates superior outcomes versus standard R squared. What I see here is the magnitude of that progression-free survival advantage, deep CR rates, and durability suggest that this could be a new benchmark in second-line therapy. Definitely an important early option for patients, particularly those who have progressed after frontline immunochemotherapy and are candidates for this kind of immune-based outpatient regimen. It may be specifically attractive for patients looking to avoid kind of the overarching toxicities related to chemotherapy, maybe those that aren't ideal for CAR T cell therapies, or those who prefer kind of that readily available off the shelf approach with that strong efficacy. The challenge that I may see here is not with epcoritamab so much, but the combination. Lenalidomide often can be pretty toxic on its own. And so I think this is really important for us as pharmacists to be aware of in the management of these patients. Yeah, so pharmacists play a central role in the successful implementation of any new regimen that's recently approved by the FDA, but specifically for bispecifics, in the fact that pharmacists have to be very well coordinated with how to ensure patients receive their step-up dosing, whether that's inpatient or outpatient or a combination of each, and making sure that the team is aware of the mitigation protocols. Oftentimes, pharmacists are involved in the creation of those protocols, but really making sure that the team is ensuring adherence, that the patients are appropriately educated, their caregivers are educated. The pharmacists play a central role in the selection of pre-medication, prophylaxis management, often, especially with a regimen like this that can be somewhat immunosuppressive. These patients will require prophylactic antibiotics and often have concerns for infections. So pharmacists can play a role in preventing and monitoring for infections. Of course, I mentioned with lenalidomide, cytopenia is a common adverse event, and so we're looking for how to manage cytopenias as well as some of the immune-mediated toxicities that we see. So, so clinically, those are kind of the big things that pharmacists play a central role for, but oftentimes pharmacists are pulled into some of the financial navigation as well, and making sure that patients are able to financially afford and are able to have this approved by their insurance. And so pharmacists play a variety of roles, both operationally, clinically, and financially. Yeah, so I think from a patient perspective, this approval offers high response rate without that chemotherapy, that traditional chemotherapy that patients sometimes are a little more hesitant with. It's convenient, it's off the shelf, meaning that it's readily available. They don't have to worry about their cells being collected and then manufactured over a course of several weeks. They avoid kind of that prolonged potential hospitalization that we often see with CAR T cell therapy. And there may even be a potential for an improved quality of life, with many patients able to maintain their daily activities and work during treatment because this can be given outpatient. So overall, I think this regimen in particular allows them to have faster access to therapy that's effective when they first relapsed. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think this approval further validates that bispecific antibodies are not going anywhere, and in fact can be a cornerstone platform in not only indolent lymphomas, but even beyond that. We see many bispecifics being studied not only in hematologic malignancies, but also in oncology. And so I can anticipate that we'll see an accelerated development of combination strategies. We see that often when something is working really, really well. Definitely anticipate that it'll be moved into earlier lines of therapy, and just further kind of exploration and investigation into how to make it as efficacious as possible. But again, kind of that focus on that chemo-free immune-based regimen that's scalable and really accessible to the broader community.